All right, U.S. history. Welcome back. Today we're talking about something that I'm excited about. We get to do something we haven't done all year, and most of the classes that I teach will never get to do this because most years we have um, an EOC, so we really have to be tight on time and how much time we're spending on things. But this is a great opportunity for us. So we're studying the Roaring Twenties, as you guys know, that era, um, and we talked yesterday a lot about industrialization, and then we mentioned the rise in popular culture with increases or improvements in communication, television and movies and that kind of thing. Uh, we see really for the first time ever celebrity in the modern sense of the world. Of course, we had national heroes before, political figures, military figures, that type of thing. But we really, for the first time ever, are seeing what you and I would think of when we think of the word celebrity. Um, I guess we would think of the same thing. But anyway, today we're going to talk about a guy who is somewhat of a forgotten figure in American history. And I think that he's worth talking about because he's certainly an icon of sport. Uh, he is associated very closely with this time period, and he's a Native American, and we've been talking all year about uh, basically the imperialist nature of our country and how Native Americans and other minorities, unfortunately, up to this point in our class, have been subjugated. So it's a good chance um, to talk about sports, football specifically, which I love, to talk about Native Americans, which I also very much enjoy, and to take a break from just what we've been doing really all year, all semester, which is pounding out notes and doing that kind of thing. So I want to start out with a question. What do you think of, who do you think of when I say the world's greatest athlete? We all know who this guy is, Michael Jordan. Do you know who that is? That's LeBron James, of course. When I was a kid, it was all about this guy. Bo Jackson played professional football and professional baseball, but so did, where'd he go? I lost my Dion picture. So did this guy, Deion Sanders. So when I think greatest athlete of all time, my mind, and I love this picture here, where he's in the locker room. He's got like a Jerry curl, shades, diamond earrings, and he's on a giant phone. Um, Most of y'all, or at least some of you guys, probably know Dion. Most of you do. I'm thinking most of you, or a lot of you, know Bo Jackson. I'm betting every single one of you knows LeBron James. But how many of you know this guy? Don't you do that. How many of y'all know him? He actually did three sports professionally, or one, I guess not professionally, but at the Olympic level. This is a man named Jim Thorpe. Thorpe was a Native American. He was educated at a place called the Carlisle Indian Industrial School. And the Carlisle Indian Industrial School was a school intended to westernize Native Americans. It was the late 1800s, early 1900s, and we were still expanding and really setting up shop out west, encountering Native Americans as we went. And you had people like Jim, who he had a Native American name. What was his? It meant bright path. I know that. Watho Huck, bright path. But he was a Sac and Fox Indian. He grew up in Oklahoma. So you now had these Native Americans who grew up, who were born and raised in the United States in territories that were actual states. So this is a generation of actual American citizens who are Native Americans. Now, the question then for the U.S. government became, how do we get these people to assimilate into our culture? In other words, how do we get them to sort of drop their native customs and that type of thing and adopt a more American lifestyle? And the answer to that, or at least one experiment in that, was these industrial schools where they would round up Native Americans, young men from all over the Southwest, really, and elsewhere, but mainly the Southwest, and they shipped them to Pennsylvania to essentially what amounted to a college or like a boarding school. So today it's a little self indulgent. Bear with me, but I found this a few years ago. It's a paper that I wrote for a history class when I was at Georgia State University. And you can tell that there was some minimum word limit because my writing is a bit redundant. But I do think it's a good enough essay that I think it's worthwhile to share with the class. And this is going to hopefully paint a picture for you of the dynamics during this era between whites and Native Americans, the role that popular culture and sort of consumer culture and fans, um, like sporting fans and stadiums and that kind of thing, the role that they're starting to play, and just generally um, what I think as a diehard sports fan and really a football fan first and foremost. I think it's an interesting slice of history to talk about the military schools, et cetera, et cetera. So without further ado, we're going to go through this essay. It's not too long. If you prefer to not hear me read it, you can just pause the screen and read it yourself. And then after we go through this, your assignment for today is going to be further reading about him. And you're going to read, and then there are questions. Now, here's the thing. Do not, I bet I get questions about do we have to do this or not. You can ignore these, okay? Ignore the questions below the article. For your classwork for today, it's going to say week 2, day 4 assignment, and I'll attach this thing, the PDF. This is where you read the information, pages 1 and 2. And then I've also attached a Google Doc, and the Google Doc is the document that you're actually going to be filling your answers in on. So don't worry about trying to type on that PDF. Also, the PDF has, I think, 25 questions and an essay. For this assignment, for this classwork assignment, there are only 15 questions. So make sure that you're reading the directions. I put this one in bold with two asterisks on each side. So um, anyway, let's read the article, and then we're gonna talk a little bit about the Olympics and kind of what that meant. But um, right now, let's go ahead and go through the article again. Um, wrote this as a student, but I've reread it, of course, numerous times, and fact checked myself, and I feel good about it. Keeping the warrior spirit and gaining respect with football at Carlisle Indian and oh my goodness. Keeping the warrior spirit and gaining respect with football at Carlisle Indian School. The Carlisle Indian Industrial School was founded in 1879 in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Under the leadership of Captain Richard Henry Pratt, a former United States cavalry officer, the Carlisle School sought to help Native American Indians from over 140 tribes to assimilate into civilized society. Described as a combination of, quote, American idealism and arrogance, end quote, Carlisle was the original and set the standard for Native American boarding schools, of which there eventually grew to be over 20 throughout the United States. From 1879 to 1918, over 12,000 Native Americans were sent to live and study at Carlisle. Some students were able to successfully assimilate into so called civilized society. However, many more students were unable to make the drastic change demanded by the faculty at Carlisle and succumbed to depression and other illnesses or simply ran away. An excerpt from an article from the Christian Advocate entitled An Experiment in Indian Education illustrates the way in which Anglo-Saxon society viewed the efforts at the Carlisle schools, saying, the plan under consideration contemplates the civilization and education of Indian children. Certainly, this is better than to contend in arms with the savage warrior. While both the motives and methods of the Carlisle are debatable, see that, kids? Typo in my paper. While both the motives and methods of the Carlisle are debatable, one great achievement did come out of the difficult circumstances at the school. The Indians at Carlisle formed an American football team that, despite having no previous experience or knowledge of the sport, went on to become one of the most storied programs in the history of college football. The Carlisle Indians competed against top collegiate programs such as West Point and Harvard, introduced new innovations to the sport that are still in use today, and left a lasting legacy on the American sporting landscape. Moreover, the game of football provided the students at Carlisle with an outlet for their warrior spirit and allowed them to maintain a sense of pride in their Native American heritage. Still, the significance of the football team at Carlisle and their games against white universities transcended sports. As evidenced by the repeated use of the metaphor of war by journalists in describing their games, football was a way that these Indians could measure themselves against an enemy to whom, in all other aspects of life, they were subservient. The game, like the country in which it was invented, was a rough, bastardized thing that jumped up out of the mud. This line from Sally Jenkins' book, The Real All Americans, captures the rough and tumble nature of America during the start of the 20th century and describes the sport of football as it was played during that era. So keep in mind, late 1800s, early 1900s, armed conflict between Native Americans and the American military were still very fresh. So um, this was all very fresh for these kids, for their parents and grandparents and that kind of thing. So um, the metaphor of war really is appropriate here. The uniquely violent nature of football made it the perfect vehicle for Indians to test their athletic prowess against the white man. Football is, in essence, a struggle to gain land. One team tries to advance the ball towards the goal line, while the opposing team attempts to prevent them from advancing. In other words, it is symbolic of America's advancement into territories previously belonging to Indians and the Indians' subsequent retreat westward. Some members of polite society found the brutality of football repulsive. However, it captured the hearts of many Americans who were caught up in the adventurous new chapter of American history in which they existed. In fact, even President Theodore Roosevelt, whose son competed against the Carlisle Indians while playing at Harvard University, was quoted as saying, "Of all the games, I personally like football the best, and I would rather see my boys play it than any other. I have no patience with people who declaim against it." That's the president, folks. Still, despite its popularity, American football was undeniably brutal and dangerous at the turn of the 20th century. It is no wonder that white and red men alike viewed their endeavors on the football field as an extension of the military conflicts that had been resolved only a few years earlier. In the 1904 season alone, there were 21 fatalities and more than 200 serious injuries across the nation. 21 people died, including fractured collarbones, splintered legs, dislocated shoulders, and concussed heads. These injuries could just as easily be the results from battle as a football season. As mentioned in the introduction, football gave the Carlisle Indians a chance to maintain their warrior heritage. Football would seem a natural outlet for such a heritage due to its requirement of bravery and toughness, as well as the combative nature of the game. Journalists who covered the Carlisle Indians often used the language of war in describing their games, and the Carlisle football team received great coverage from the mainstream media. We now have a mass media in a way that we previously didn't. Um, a New York Times article entitled "Yale Beats the Indian, White and Red Men in Mimic Warfare on the Polo Grounds yesterday afternoon." Excuse me. Exemplifies this point. As the article's author puts it, effective football requires all the elements of physical power and many of the qualities of the scientific and successful warrior. For the Carlisle Indians, victory on the football field signified not only their superior athleticism, but their superiority as warriors as well. The article goes on to say that the football games between Indians and whites stirred the remnants of savagery lurking in the blood of men. That would be more dramatic if I read it correctly. The article goes on to say that the football games between the Indians and the whites stirred the remnants of savagery lurking in the blood of men. Certainly, this journalist could have chosen different words, but by using words like savagery and phrases such as "in the blood," readers get the sense that this type of combat is a part of the very identity of the Carlisle players. This was surely a source of great satisfaction for the Carlisle students, who had been relegated to a life in which they were considered lesser people and in which they were forbidden to live in the way that they had long been accustomed. As the article goes on to say, the Carlisle football team was comprised of descendants of long lines of ancestors with whom strength, swiftness, and cunning were necessary in their daily lives and were the elements of greatness. These qualities not only apply to great warriors, but to great football players as well. In the minds of the Indians, their military defeat at the hands of American troops resulted not from mental or physical inferiority, but from uneven circumstances. As their coach Glenn Pop Warner said of the Indians, it was not that they felt any definite bitterness against the conquering white or against the government for years of unfair treatment, but rather they believed the armed contest between the red man and the white man had never been waged on equal terms. Through the formation of a football team, the Carlisle Indians would have a chance to compete in a regulated, presumably fair environment. By competing against the white man and, in many cases, coming out victorious, the Carlisle Indians gained some respect among American sports fans and, to a lesser extent, the American public as a whole. Football was, as one newspaper article put it, man against man on equal terms. Football was truly just an extension of the battle between the Native Americans and their white conquerors. See, guys, as a teacher, when a kid starts repeating himself, he ran out of stuff to say. At a Carlisle pep rally, the leader of the marching band, an Indian by the name of Dennison Wheelock, addressed the students saying about the Indian man, "The only way I see how he may reoccupy the lands that were once his is through football. And as football takes brains, takes energy, it proves whether a civilization can be understood by the Indian or not, we are willing to perpetuate it." To their Ivy League counterparts, football was merely a sport, but to the Carlisle Indians, it was a way to keep fighting and to hold on to their cultural identity and pride. The Carlisle Indian football team not only garnered respect for the Indian community and their talents and helped the Indians keep their warrior spirit, it also left a lasting legacy on the sport of American football. Any American boy who played youth football in the last century is familiar with the name Pop Warner. He was the coach at Carlisle and is a member of the Football Hall of Fame for his contributions to the game. A new newspaper article entitled "Redskins with Few Opportunities in Sport Progress Rapidly at Carlisle," it is written that most critics have given Coach Warner credit for being one of the leading offensive coaches in the country. He used trick plays previously unseen in football, and the Carlisle team was the first football team to build their offense around the use of the forward pass, a tactic that is currently employed by every major program. Additionally, Carlisle gave us Jim Thorpe. Thorpe was a standout for the Carlisle Indians and went on to earn multiple gold medals and play professional baseball after leaving school. He is still considered by many football historians to be the most prolific athlete ever to play the game. Athletics are woven into the fabric of America and are often a reflection of the social and political climate of the times. This was the case during the early 1900s when word of the remarkable Carlisle Indian football team was spreading throughout the country. Considering the political turmoil concerning the relocation and civilization of the Native American population during the early 19th century, it is notable that the Carlisle football team received such support and admiration from the white community. When the New York Times wrote of the Carlisle team that there has been no more popular team on the gridiron, that is truly remarkable considering the tension between white and red men at the time. Carlisle Indians were praised for their athletic ability. The same New York Times article goes on to say that the Carlisle team was stolid and determined, rugged and powerful, fleet and apparently untiring, appeared to be the ideal physical athlete to make the best of the great game. The author may only be writing about a football team, but football provided one of the only avenues for the Indians to showcase their skills and abilities to a national audience. In other words, by excelling in football, the Carlisle Indians could potentially show mainstream society that they were equal in other areas as well. The students at Carlisle were stripped of their culture and heritage. They were forbidden to speak their native languages, forced to dress in Anglo-Saxon clothing, and had to attend Christian worship service. While it can certainly be argued that the Carlisle Indian Industrial School represented a labor of love, as it was described by some, it is difficult to deny that the circumstances would be disheartening for the once proud Native Americans. Still, despite their military defeat and their lack of opportunities elsewhere, the Carlisle football program gave the Indians a rare chance to be proud and to cling to their roots. When they took the field against their white opponents, it transcended football. The games were an extension of the long-standing conflict between white and red. Coach Glenn Pop Warner put it best in his pregame speech to Carlisle prior to their 1912 game against West Point. I love this, guys. He says, "Your fathers and your grandfathers are the ones who fought their fathers. They are the Long Knives. You are the Indians. Tonight we will know if you are warriors." The Carlisle football team were warriors in the truest sense, and in playing football, they were able to raise the perception of Indians as a whole. As Sally Jenkins writes, they didn't just change football, they changed prevailing ideas about Indians. The Carlisle players were something different. They were winners. I think that's a really cool story. This is a famous photograph. Look at his shoes. If you look closely at Jim Thorpe's feet in this photo, you will notice he's wearing different socks and shoes. This was not a fashion statement, but rather a desperate attempt to improvise after his shoes were stolen the morning of his track and field competition at the 1912 Olympics. Basically, his shoes got stolen the morning of the race, and his coach, Glenn Warner, the same coach from Carlisle, was able to pull a pair of shoes out of the trash can. And you can see one of them, this one here, was a few sizes too big. So he had to wear like 4 pairs of socks, but he still went on and won a gold medal, which is really pretty cool. So anyway, I loved getting to do a deeper dive into an American story that I think is really cool. So we've got about 2 minutes left. I think I'll go ahead and start this up. Remember, you have an assignment that is due tomorrow. Good job this week, guys. Keep on doing your work, and I will talk to you later.
In 1999, a joint resolution of Congress recognized the athlete of the 20th century. It was a man today many have never heard of, an Indian from Oklahoma named Jim Thorpe.
It was the times to educate the Indian, to get them away from being heathens and learn to eat with a knife, fork, and spoon.
It was not a real comfortable existence for many of those homesick children. And quite frankly, I found out that Jim Thorpe was one of many Indian children. When they got the opportunity, they were heading out of Dodge.
These guys were practicing high jump, and nobody could get over that bar. And so they went over the top of the bar, had a couple inches to spare. And Warner saw that. Said, "What the hell's that?"
I personally think that the Oorang Indians, the Canton Bulldogs, were teams that probably introduced people to pro football.
Coming to big league like he did, I thought he was a hell of a ball player. He was bad. He could do anything.
He's the only Olympic athlete to ever participate in 17 events. Won the decathlon, and also he won the pentathlon. You know, people were mystified.
Dad had a very sad personal life. He lost his twin. He lost his mother. He lost his father. His first son. He lost his first child.
I know Dad would say, "Well, All those medals, those trophies, they're material items. You can replace material items. You can't replace what you have in here. And I think if there was really any hurt, that's where it came from, was being the people that he trusted turning on him to save their own careers. It's a legend in any country.
Listening to my dad, he says, if there's anybody that can outrun you, it's Jim Thorpe.
Whenever I get down and tired sometimes, I used to always think about it in my mind about Jim Thorpe and doing what he did, and it would motivate me to just keep running and just keep going.
USA. All right, guys. Talk to you later.